You were always too good to be just good. You were always too great to be just great. But you know what hurts the most? Discovering that being the best means absolutely nothing if the emptiness you carry inside keeps eating away at your soul. These words weren't spoken by a critic, a rival, or an enemy. They were spoken by someone LeBron James loved deeply. They were spoken in the dim light of an empty locker room, on a night when the lights had already dimmed and the sounds of the crowd had completely disappeared. That voice belonged to his mother, Gloria James. LeBron lay on the locker room bench, still wearing his sweat-soaked training shirt, panting heavily, his muscles still trembling from that particularly brutal practice. It had been a 23-year career, 23 years of victories, records broken, international competitions won, championships captured, and individual awards accumulated like gold trophies lined up on a seemingly endless shelf of honor. And yet, there was a weight that no gold medal could lift. Gloria entered the locker room with slow, careful steps, as if she were walking through a sacred scene. She carried 2 cups of hot tea in her hands, steam rising gently in the cool, conditioned air of the room. She had seen her son like this hundreds of times, but this time there was something different in her expression. There was concern. There was genuine love. There was the understanding of a mother who realizes that her son, despite all his achievements, was still lost. "My son," she began, sitting down beside him and passing a cup to his shaking hands. "Do you know what I saw today when I was watching that sports program?" LeBron slowly lifted his head. He knew this conversation. He knew this intonation. It was the kind of mother-son conversation that needs to say something true. "I saw them talking about you as if you were a god, as if you weren't made of flesh, blood, and feelings, as if every point you score was a reason to be venerated. And you hear that day after day, don't you? Day after day. People around the world treating you as if you were perfect, as if you were incapable of error, as if you were less human and more monument." Gloria took a deep breath, looked her son in the eyes, and continued in a voice that trembled slightly. "But here's the truth no one tells you, LeBron. Here's the secret the old men try to hide. The truth is, you can be the greatest basketball player the world has ever seen. You can break every record. You can win every championship. You can be revered on every continent on Earth, and still wake up empty." LeBron felt something tighten in his chest. It wasn't fear. It wasn't anger. It was recognition. It was the raw truth that no award could mask. Gloria placed her hand over his and continued, "Because no victory heals a wound that comes from within. No award changes who you are when the cameras turn off and the crowds disperse. No acclaim silences the inner voice that whispers that you should have done more, given more, been more." That night, in that silent locker room, with his mother's voice echoing through the empty hallways, LeBron James realized there was still one battle to be won, and this would be the most important of his life. Because it wasn't a battle played on a hardwood court. It was a battle fought deep within the human soul. It was a battle for personal redemption. It was a battle for character. LeBron James's story is often told as that of a one-size-fits-all hero. A boy born in Akron, Ohio, who rose from the depths of poverty and despair. A boy whose hands touched a basketball and discovered that within them lay freedom. A boy who became a man, who became a legend, who became a myth. But every true hero's story contains a falling point. It contains an abyss. It contains a point where the hero must confront not only his external enemies, but his own inner shadows. For LeBron, that moment had come a long time ago, but he had never truly faced it. He had built walls around himself, walls of success, walls made of points, of victories, of global respect. But within those walls he was alone, incredibly, utterly alone. The court is a sacred place for an athlete like LeBron. The court is where he is immortal. The court is where he controls the universe around him. But on that particular night, the court was no longer a sanctuary. It was a mirror, and the reflection LeBron saw didn't please him. There was a young player on the team. Talented, yes, but arrogant. dangerously arrogant. His name was Marcus, and he was only 22 years old. He had been a high draft pick, promised to be the future, the next great phenomenon of professional basketball. And he knew it. More than knowing it, he proclaimed it, arrogantly, disrespectfully. During a private workout, while most of the players had left, Marcus approached LeBron in the locker room. There was sweat on his forehead. There was defiance in his eyes. There was the youthful arrogance that knows only his own reflection in the mirror. "You know," Marcus began, his voice thick with contempt disguised as admiration, "I used to watch you when I was a kid. I thought you were the greatest. I thought no one could ever touch you. But now that I'm here, now that I'm in the same locker room as you, I see it. I see you're not as dominant anymore. I see your movements aren't as quick. I see your stride isn't as explosive. I see you're getting older, LeBron. And you know what the truth is? The truth is your time is up, and my time is beginning." Marcus spoke these words with surgical precision, each syllable a blow. And then he turned and walked out, leaving LeBron alone in the locker room. In that moment, LeBron felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. He felt anger, not just anger, but a fierce anger, a rage that burned his insides, a rage that made him stand up, fists clenched, wanting to chase that young man and show him exactly who LeBron James was. But he didn't do that. Instead, he sat back down. He took a breath. And in that silence, he heard his mother's voice again, not as a distant memory, but as a living, breathing, almost tangible presence. True strength is not shown in the anger you let out. True strength is shown in the silence you cultivate when anger wants to echo. And LeBron finally understood. He finally glimpsed the shadow that had been haunting him his entire life. The shadow was himself. The LeBron who had allowed the world to define him. The LeBron who had allowed acclaim to consume him. The LeBron who had harvested power from ego instead of purpose from character. The days that followed were different. The training was the same. The routines were the same. But something fundamental had changed inside LeBron James. There was a new intention. There was a renewed purpose. He began to look at Marcus differently, not with contempt, not with the need to regain his crown through humiliation, but with understanding, with empathy, because LeBron saw himself in that young man. He saw himself in that arrogant boy's eyes. He saw the version of himself he had been when he was too young, too talented, too celebrated, too soon. One night, after a particularly tough workout, LeBron approached Marcus in the weight room. The young man was doing curls, explosive movements, confident, invincible in his own mind. LeBron waited until Marcus finished his set. And then, calmly, without drama, without an audience, he spoke. "Want to train with me tomorrow? Just you and me, on the private court." Before dawn, Marcus stopped. Surprise was on his face. He was anticipating an epic confrontation, a battle of egos that would confirm who truly was king. "Of course," Marcus replied, a cocky grin shaping his face. "I'll show you exactly why your time is wasted." LeBron just nodded. There was no anger in his eyes. There was something Marcus couldn't fully comprehend. There was compassion. There was the wisdom of someone who had been where Marcus was and had finally found the way back. Dawn arrived in shades of orange and pale pink. The private court was an almost mystical place at that hour. The lights hadn't yet been fully turned on. There was only natural light filtering through the windows, casting long shadows, creating a space that seemed to be between worlds, between real time and dream time. Marcus was there first. Already warmed up, already prepared. His body was beautiful in its athleticism. His movements were fluid. His confidence was, to be fair, well-founded. He was indeed talented. LeBron arrived a few minutes later. He wore simple shorts and a worn gray t-shirt, none of the high-tech gear Marcus wore. His hair had gone gray in recent years. His body bore the marks of nearly 2,500 professional games. "Ready?" LeBron asked. "Always have been," Marcus replied with a cocky grin. What unfolded in the next few minutes wasn't a game of brute force. It wasn't a display of skill meant to humiliate. It was, instead, a basketball lesson, a living lesson, one that would be etched in Marcus's memory for the rest of his life. LeBron didn't beat Marcus through athletic explosiveness. LeBron beat Marcus through something much deeper, through emotional intelligence, through understanding the game, through the patience that comes only from genuine experience. With every move Marcus made, LeBron countered him not with force but with wisdom. With every ego-driven attack, LeBron countered with strategy. With every cry of frustration that escaped the young player's mouth, LeBron remained silent, focused, a calm and constant presence. After 20 minutes of play, Marcus was breathing heavily, not just from the physical exertion, but from the gradual realization that was dawning on him. At that moment, LeBron stopped the game. "Want a drink?" he asked, and his tone wasn't one of victory. It was one of genuine compassion. They sat in the bleachers in the dim light. Sweat dripped down both of their bodies. But there was a peace in that moment that transcended the competition. LeBron began speaking, not as a victor speaking to a vanquished man, but as a man who had completed a journey, speaking to someone still at the beginning of his. "You know," LeBron began, "when I was your age, I was just like you. I believed that basketball was about proving I was the best, that every victory was a confirmation of my worth, that every point scored was a coin I could put in a pocket already full of gold. I thought that when I had achieved everything, when I had broken every barrier, when I had achieved every dream, then I would finally be at peace." LeBron paused. He looked out at the empty court, now illuminated by the early morning light streaming through the windows. "But you know what the truth was that no one ever told me? No one ever told me that conquering the outer world means absolutely nothing if you haven't conquered the inner world. No one ever told me that there can be no greater emptiness than the one you feel when you have everything you ever wanted and still feel empty. No one ever told me that true victory isn't about beating someone. It's about becoming someone who deserves to win." Marcus had tears in his eyes now. They weren't tears of humiliation. They were tears of recognition. They were tears of someone who suddenly realized that his journey was much greater than he had imagined. LeBron placed his hand on the young player's shoulder. "You're talented, Marcus. You're truly talented. And you'll have a long and successful career if you decide to build that career on who you are as a person, not as a player. Because in the end, when it's all over, when the crowds fade and the awards rust, the only thing you'll take with you is your character. It's the truth of who you are when no one is looking." The days turned into weeks, and the weeks turned into months. There was a remarkable change in Marcus. His arrogance hadn't completely disappeared, because arrogance, youthful confidence, is a necessary part of any athlete who aspires to greatness. But there was a new humility accompanying it now. There was a consciousness. There was an understanding that athletic excellence and excellence of character need not be separated. And LeBron began a parallel journey, an internal journey that no one could measure with statistics, no one could quantify with box score numbers. He began spending more time with those who loved him, with his mother, who had planted the seeds of truth in that locker room conversation, with his children, who had learned to see him not as a legend, but as a father with his own fears and insecurities, with those members of the community who never asked for anything more than his genuine presence. He returned to the court of his childhood in Akron, that same court where a poor, fatherless boy with a mother he loved deeply had discovered that through the basketball lay freedom. The court was cracked now, partially destroyed by time. The hoops were still there, but without nets. The asphalt was uneven. LeBron was there alone one afternoon, just him in that sacred place. He picked up a ball and began doing what he'd done millions of times before. He shot for the basket and made it, and rebounded the ball, and shot again. There were no cameras. There was no crowd. No score being recorded. There was just one man, one hoop, and one ball, and in that silence, LeBron felt something he had long lost. He felt joy, pure joy. Joy that didn't come from victory. Joy that came from the simple act of playing, the simple act of being alive, the simple act of being in motion, in a place where it all began. A small child appeared as he played. A boy, perhaps 10 years old, coming from one of the nearby houses. The boy stopped a little way off, watching. Then slowly he approached. "You're good," said the boy with the disarming honesty of youth. "Thank you," LeBron replied, smiling. "Do you think I can be good too?" asked the boy. LeBron stopped, paused. He looked at the child's hopeful face, and something inside him stirred. "Can I tell you a secret?" LeBron asked, approaching the boy. The boy nodded, his eyes wide and full of expectation. "The secret isn't being good at basketball," LeBron said. "The secret is being good as a person. Because if you're good as a person, if you work hard not because you want to prove something to anyone else, but because you respect yourself, if you treat everyone you meet with kindness and dignity, if you remember that the next person you pass on the street also has a heart that beats and dreams that whisper, then yes, you'll be good at basketball too. Because basketball is just a reflection of who you really are inside." The boy didn't fully understand, but he sensed something in the way LeBron spoke. He felt the living truth in those words. "Want to play with me?" LeBron asked. And for the next 40 minutes, the man considered the best basketball player in the world played a 10-year-old boy. There was no scoreboard. There was no winning or losing. There were just two human beings sharing joy, sharing movement, sharing the magic that exists when we allow ourselves to be genuinely present with another. When they finally stopped, both tired and breathing heavily, the boy said, "You know, even if you never played professional basketball, you'd still be cool." LeBron laughed from the depths of his being, because the boy had just spoken the most profound truth any sports critic had uttered in decades. News of LeBron's transformation slowly spread throughout the sports world, not as a scandal, not as a downfall, but as a story of redemption, a story of someone who had had it all and discovered it wasn't enough, a story of someone who had finally understood the difference between being great and being good. The sports media didn't know how to handle this at first. Pundits expected sensationalism. They expected LeBron to become that player who wasted his talent on philosophy and introspection. They expected him to become less focused, less competitive, less capable of winning championships. But what actually happened was the opposite. That season, the season in which LeBron had his spiritual awakening, was one of the best of his life. Not because he was playing differently, but because he was playing for different reasons. He was playing because he loved the game, not because he needed to prove something. He was playing because he respected his teammates and wanted to help them achieve their best, not because he wanted to be recognized as the greatest. There was a peace in his movements now, a deliberation, a grace that hadn't been there before, because every action was a reflection of pure intention. Marcus, the arrogant young player who had started it all, became LeBron's confidant. The two formed an unlikely friendship. They spent hours together, training together, talking together, walking together through this journey of personal discovery. One particular night, it was raining. The rain fell softly, steadily, creating a symphony of tapping against the windows of LeBron's apartment. Marcus was there sitting on the couch, and there was a game on the television. It wasn't their game. It was just a regular professional game. "You know," Marcus began, his voice thoughtful, "when I first met you, when I said those horrible things in the locker room, I really believed it. I really believed that if I could just defeat you, if I could just overcome you, it would mean something. It would mean I was on my way, that I was becoming who I was meant to be." LeBron was listening without interrupting. "But you showed me something different," Marcus continued. "You showed me that defeating someone else isn't an achievement. The real achievement is defeating yourself. It's defeating your own demons. It's defeating your own arrogance. It's allowing yourself to be humiliated, not because you want to be, but because you finally understand that humility isn't weakness. That humility is actually the sign of true strength." LeBron smiled, and in that smile was all the knowledge he had gained through his own journey of transformation. "You know what's funny?" LeBron asked. "I had to be over 35 years old and have almost 2,500 professional games under my belt to finally learn what you're learning now. You have a huge advantage. You still have time to build your legacy on the right foundation. Not on ego, on character. Do you think I'll ever be big? Marcus asked, and there was genuine vulnerability in his question. You're going to be more than great, LeBron replied. You're going to be significant. And there's a huge difference between the two. Months passed. The season reached its peak. The championship was close. The competition was fierce. There were teams that wanted to destroy LeBron's team. There were rivals who saw his season as an opportunity to finally unseat them. But that season was different because the goal wasn't simply to win. The goal was to win while maintaining integrity, while elevating those around you, while building something that transcended points and wins. There was a player on the rival team who was known for being particularly disrespectful. His name was Deshaun, and he had built his reputation on talking. He talked to intimidate. He talked to destabilize. He talked to hurt. During one particular game, Deshaun spent the entire game talking to LeBron. He cursed, he taunted. He tried to make him lose focus. You're old, LeBron. You're past your prime. You're a corpse walking this court. Your best day is over, old man. Nobody wants your wisdom. They want youth. They want speed. They want someone who still has fire in their blood. The LeBron of 15 years ago would have responded. He would have traded insults. He would have let his arrogance and anger take over. He would have seen that confrontation as an opportunity to prove his superiority through verbal aggression. But the LeBron of today was different. At halftime, as the teams headed to the locker rooms, LeBron approached Deshaun in the tunnel hallway. There was silence around them. Reporters sensed something important was happening. Want to know a secret? LeBron asked, his voice soft but full of genuine authority. Deshaun turned to him, surprised by his approach. I spent years believing that being the best meant beating people like you through intimidation and aggression. LeBron said, it meant making you feel small. It meant speaking louder, hitting harder, proving myself superior through domination. And you know what I discovered when I finally did it. I discovered that I still felt empty. I discovered that there was still a void inside me that no amount of winning could fill. LeBron paused. His eyes met Deshaun's. But then, finally, I learned something different. I learned that real strength isn't in hurting someone. It's in lifting them up. Real strength isn't in defeating someone. It's in lifting them up. And you know what the truth is that no one wants to hear. The truth is that the one who can conquer his own anger, the one who can remain calm when everyone around him is shouting, the one who can speak kindly when everyone around him is speaking hatefully, that one is the true winner. That one is the true king. Deshaun didn't respond immediately. There was something in LeBron's words that had reached a deep place within him. You're crazy, Deshaun finally said. But there was less aggression in his voice. There was confusion. There was the slow realization that he had been playing a different game than the man he thought he was competing with. Maybe, LeBron agreed with a smile. But that doesn't change the truth of what I said. As the second half began, something curious happened. Deshaun was still playing hard. He was still competing. But he wasn't talking anymore. He was letting his game do the talking. And when LeBron occasionally scored a particularly good point, there was a nod of recognition from Deshaun. There was unspoken respect in his eyes. His team won that game by 5 points. But more important than the victory was what happened after the game. Deshaun sought out LeBron again. This time there was no media audience. There were just two men. Thank you, Deshaun said, simplicity in his voice. For what? LeBron asked. For showing me there's a different way to be, Deshaun replied. For showing me that you can be competitive and aggressive and still respect your opponent. That you can want to win and still want the other person to be their best self. I won't forget that. The championship finally arrived. The playoffs. That series of games where the goals are eliminated one by one and only the best remain. The game LeBron had waited his entire life for. The game that would test everything he had learned. That series was brutal. It was pure domination. His team advanced round after round, leaving a trail of defeated teams behind them. And at the center of it all was LeBron James, playing with a clarity of purpose that transcended sport. He wasn't just playing basketball. He was teaching basketball. He was elevating his teammates. He was creating opportunities. He was being the kind of player who made everyone around him better. And paradoxically, while doing so, he was improving his own game as well. The finals arrived. His team faced a fierce opponent, a team that had gotten there through its own journey of athletic excellence. The first game was everything a championship final should be. It was balanced. It was tense. It was full of drama. In the fourth quarter, with only minutes remaining, the game was tied. There was a timeout. The coaches had a 1-minute timeout to prepare the final play. LeBron's coach laid out the strategy. He gave the instructions. And then the game resumed. The ball was in LeBron's hands. His team was behind. There were only 20 seconds left on the clock. All the pressure in the world seemed to be resting on his shoulders. LeBron could have tried to shoot. He could have tried to be the hero. He could have tried to create the moment that would live forever through his own individual athletic excellence, but he didn't do that. Instead, he passed the ball to Marcus, the young player who had started as his rival. Marcus had an open shot, and for a second there was a pause, a hesitation, a doubt flashing in his eyes, but then Marcus took a breath and scored, and his team won. When the game ended, while everyone around him celebrated, LeBron sought out Marcus in the confusion. He found him and hugged him, but it was a special hug, because in that hug lay every lesson LeBron had learned. In that hug lay the truth that the greatest prize wasn't victory itself, but having lifted someone beside you to achieve it with you. In the following days, as his team continued winning consecutive games toward the ultimate championship, LeBron did something that surprised virtually everyone. He gave an interview, but it wasn't to major media outlets. It wasn't to television shows that paid millions. It was to a small video production company that created meaningful content about human transformation. In the interview, conducted on an empty court on a Saturday morning, with only a cameraman and a producer present, LeBron opened his heart in a way he had never done publicly before. "You know," he began, sitting on the courtside bench, "for most of my career I saw basketball as a war. I saw my opponents as enemies to be destroyed. I saw every game as a battle where there were winners and losers, and I needed to be a winner because the weight of being too good wouldn't allow me to be anything less. That was a prison. That was a prison I built for myself with the hands of my ego and cemented with the fear of not being enough." The cameraman captured the raw truth on his face as he spoke. "But then, a few months ago, something broke inside me. And when it broke, it left room for something new to come in. It left room for me to understand that maybe basketball was never about winning. Maybe basketball was always about becoming better. Maybe basketball was always a metaphor for life. And life isn't about beating the people around you. Life is about lifting them up. Life is about leaving the world a little better than you found it." LeBron paused, looking out at the empty court with that distant look only those who have understood something profound can have. "My mother, Gloria James, she said something that changed my understanding. She said that a person's true legacy is not measured in trophies or records or acclaim. It's measured in the character you pass on to those who know you. It's measured in how you treat people who can't do anything for you. It's measured in the compassion you leave in the world long after you're gone." The final series was epic. 7 games, each a masterpiece of emotional intensity and athletic excellence. His team and the rival seemed in perfect balance, alternating victories, alternating dominance, alternating hope and despair. In the 6th game, with the series tied at 3-3, everything would reach its final climax. That particular game was one that would be remembered for generations. It was a game where everything learned throughout LeBron's transformational journey was put to the test against the highest pressure possible. His team was losing. They were down by 12 points in the 3rd quarter. There was a feeling in the crowd that perhaps this was the night the mantle would be passed. This was the night a new generation would claim their place on the throne. But then LeBron did something no one expected. Instead of increasing his aggression, instead of trying to win the game alone, he did the opposite. He slowed down. He became more deliberate. He started creating opportunities for his teammates. He started elevating those around him, and as he did so, something miraculous began to happen. His teammates began to believe. They began to play with confidence. They began to reach depths of excellence they didn't know they possessed. Marcus, in particular, blossomed during that game. Marcus, who had started the season as an arrogant young man, now played with the clarity of someone who had learned that true success came not from proving oneself, but from serving something greater than oneself. He scored 32 points that night, 32 points of pure excellence, and each one was facilitated by LeBron's vision. Each one was made possible because LeBron had surrendered his own ego so that Marcus could reach his own potential. In the final minute of the game, with the score tied, the ball was in Marcus's hands again. There were 10 seconds on the clock. An entire season, an entire journey, an entire personal transformation hung in the balance of the next action. Marcus dribbled slowly, deliberately. He looked at his teammates and saw LeBron positioned just outside the three-point line, hands raised, pure, open, waiting. Marcus threw it to LeBron. And LeBron, the man who had spent an entire career trying to be the ultimate hero, simply threw the ball into the basket with all his might. The ball went through the net with 2 seconds on the clock, and when the crowd erupted, when his teammates ran toward him, LeBron wasn't celebrating himself. He was embracing Marcus. He was embracing the young player who had learned the lesson his whole life had been trying to teach him. The lesson that true greatness lies in elevating others, not in elevating oneself. That night, after winning the championship, LeBron did something no one had ever seen before. When they presented the final trophy, the one typically awarded to the final's most valuable player, LeBron asked to share it with Marcus. There was silence in the arena. Reporters didn't know how to process it. Fans murmured among themselves. This had never been done before in the history of professional sports, but LeBron stepped up to the microphone, and with the entire crowd watching, he spoke. This trophy that has been presented to me represents something very different to me now than it would have represented a few months ago. It would have represented my ego, my supremacy, my right to be above. But today, this trophy represents something completely different. It represents the understanding that true victory means elevating those around you. It means recognizing that a person's excellence is not measured in isolation, but through their impact on others. LeBron paused, his eyes finding Marcus in the crowd. Marcus started this season as my rival, as someone who wanted to defeat me and take my place. And I could have responded with arrogance and dominance. I could have put him in his place through humiliation. But instead, I chose to see it as an opportunity to teach, an opportunity to uplift, an opportunity to demonstrate that basketball, at its deepest core, is about humanity. It's about recognizing that we are all trying to achieve something bigger than ourselves, and that true strength lies in helping others achieve their dreams. LeBron extended his hand to Marcus, and together they lifted the trophy. This trophy belongs to this team because this team understood that true excellence is collective. It belongs to this team because each person elevated the other. And it particularly belongs to Marcus because he had the courage to let go of his arrogance and embrace the truth that being great doesn't mean being alone. It means being surrounded by those you have elevated and who have elevated you. When LeBron stepped down from the podium, his mother was waiting for him. Gloria James, the woman who had planted the seeds of wisdom that night in the locker room, ran to her son and hugged him. "I knew it," she whispered in his ear. "I knew you'd get here, that you'd finally understand." In the months that followed, the story of LeBron James's transformation spread beyond the world of sports. It became a story of redemption, a story of someone who had everything and discovered something essential was still missing. Universities began inviting him to speak. Leadership development organizations sought his wisdom. But LeBron declined most of these invitations because he had learned that real change didn't come from lectures or public appearances. Real change came from genuine action. So instead, he started a program for young basketball talent that wasn't about developing athletes. It was about developing people. It was about teaching young people who had been blessed with extraordinary talent, that with that talent came extraordinary responsibility. The program worked simply. Exceptional young players from across the nation were invited for a week. A week where, yes, there was intense basketball training, but there were also lessons on character. There were discussions on philosophy. There were moments of silence and reflection. There were encounters with people who had achieved success through integrity rather than domination. Marcus became one of the program's core teachers. He better than anyone understood the journey from ego to self-overcoming, from arrogance to humility, from questioning to genuine purpose. In one particular class, Marcus was speaking to a group of teenagers. Next generation talent, do you know the secret no one wants to tell? Marcus asked, his voice carrying the authenticity of someone who had lived the truth he was teaching. The secret is that you can be competitive, aggressive, determined to win, and still be good. You can be kind and ruthless. You can be compassionate and fierce. These things are not contradictory. They are complementary. One of the teenagers, a young man with exceptional talent but equally exceptional arrogance, raised his hand. So you're telling us to let go of our egos, to let go of our confidence? He asked in a slightly challenging tone. Marcus smiled, because he had been that teenager who couldn't understand how you could be good without being arrogant, how you could be excellent without being self-centered. I'm not saying to give up your confidence, Marcus replied. Confidence is essential, but there's a difference between confidence and arrogance. Confidence is knowing you're good. Arrogance is thinking that being good means everyone around you is lesser. Confidence is believing in your potential. Arrogance is believing that your potential gives you the right to treat others with disrespect. Marcus paused, and when he continued, his voice carried the weight of lived truth. When I was your age, I was arrogant. I thought my talent made me superior. I thought my talent gave me special rights. And do you know where that got me? It got me to a lonely place. A place where, despite having everything, I had nothing. And then, LeBron showed me there was a different path. He showed me that you can be extraordinarily good and still be human. That you can win championships and still lose your ego. That in fact is true victory. 2 years had passed since that transformative championship. LeBron was now 37 years old, still playing, still competing, but in a fundamentally different way. His stats hadn't declined significantly. In fact, in some categories, he was having his best years. But the reason this was possible was because he wasn't playing against time. He wasn't racing against the clock, trying to rack up more records before his body failed him. He was, instead, playing with purpose. He was enjoying every moment, not because he feared it would be taken from him, but because he understood the sacred value of every moment he still had. One particular night, LeBron was at home with his mother. They were sitting on the couch in the same room where he'd had that life-changing conversation during his early years in the business. The television was on, but neither of them was actually watching. They were simply present with each other. "Mom," LeBron said, breaking the comfortable silence between them, "I've never properly thanked you for what you said that night in the locker room, for the words you planted that would eventually blossom into everything you've become." Gloria placed her hand over his. "My son," she replied, her voice carrying the wisdom of a mother who had guided her son through every step of his journey. "You don't need to thank me, because I did nothing more than any mother would do. I watched my son suffer under the weight of trying to be something, and I tried to remind him of who he really was. I tried to help him understand that you don't have to be perfect, that you don't have to have every answer, that the act of being true is far more valuable than the act of being excellent." They sat in silence again. "Do you know what my prayer is now?" Gloria continued. "My prayer is that you share this truth with the world, Not through trophies or records, but through your life. Through the way you treat people. Through who you choose to be when no one is looking. That is your true legacy, LeBron. And it always has been. When LeBron finally retired, 5 years after that transformative championship, the sports world remained in shock. Not because he had retired, but because of the way he did it. In his final farewell conference, LeBron didn't talk about his records. He didn't talk about his championships. He didn't talk about his athletic greatness. Instead, he talked about Marcus. He spoke of how an arrogant young man had challenged him, and how that challenge had brought him back to himself. He spoke of how the rejection and humiliation he had felt that day had been precisely what he needed to understand that his journey had never been about winning. It had always been about transformation. And then, in a move no one had anticipated, LeBron announced he was transferring the majority of his basketball earnings to a fund Marcus had established. A fund dedicated to establishing programs in underserved communities, programs that taught young people about character, purpose, and the true nature of excellence. Marcus and I began a journey together, LeBron explained to the crowd of reporters and fans. We began as rivals. We continue as each other's maestros. And now, as I leave the game, we will continue together, dedicated to a purpose that is much bigger than basketball, much bigger than any of us individually, dedicated to raising generations of young people who understand that true excellence doesn't mean being the best. It means being the best you can be while elevating everyone around you to be the best they can be. 10 years after his retirement, LeBron James was rarely seen on the professional court. But his influence was everywhere, not in statistics or records. It was in transformed lives. It was in rebuilt communities. It was in young people who grew up learning from an early age that basketball was not about beating others, but about challenging themselves to be better. There were hundreds of stories. There was the story of the girl from a poor community in Chicago who had participated in one of the programs and was now a doctor dedicated to serving her community. There was the story of the boy who had been driven to crime but, through the program, discovered he could channel his aggression into athletic excellence and was now at a university on a full scholarship, not only playing basketball, but also studying education so he could return and teach others. There were hundreds of stories like these, and in each of these stories, there was a connected thread, a thread that traced back to that day when a humiliated man, who had believed all he needed was to be above everyone else, finally understood that all he truly needed was to be there for everyone. One particular morning, decades after his initial transformation, LeBron stood on a rebuilt court in Akron. It was the same court where he had started, that same cracked and worn court he had visited during his journey. But now it had been restored. It had been transformed. There was new asphalt, new nets, new backboards, new possibilities. There was a youth game underway, boys and girls playing together, competing fiercely, but doing so with a fundamental understanding that had changed the very nature of the game in that community. LeBron sat on the sidelines watching, and when the game ended, as the kids gathered around an adult who was teaching them about the truth within the game, LeBron approached. The adult was Marcus. "Hey, buddy," LeBron said, and that simple greeting carried 2 decades of friendship, of mastery, of mutual transformation. "LeBron," Marcus replied, and his face lit up. "Come on, I want you to talk to these kids. I want you to tell the story." And then, as the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the court, LeBron James, the man who had been the greatest basketball player in the world, began to tell his story. "You know," he began, his voice carrying all the wisdom of a life lived to the fullest. "When I was young, when I was about your age, I believed that basketball was about winning. I believed it was about being better than everyone else. I believed that if I could be the best, that if I could win every game, every award, every accolade, then I would finally be satisfied. I would finally be good enough. I would finally have value." He paused, watching the young people's faces. "But I discovered something very different. I discovered that you can win every game and still feel empty. You can have every trophy and still feel alone. You can be acclaimed on every continent and still feel like a failure. Because all that external excellence means nothing if you don't cultivate internal excellence. If you don't develop a character that is as strong as your athletic talent. One of the young men raised his hand. So you're saying we shouldn't compete? He asked. LeBron smiled. No, I'm saying you should compete furiously. You should train with intensity. You should want to win every game. But the reason you do this shouldn't be to prove you're better than someone else. It should be to prove you're better than who you were yesterday. It should be to become the best version of yourself possible. And if you do this correctly, you'll find that your athletic excellence will be far greater because it will be coming from a place of truth and purpose, not ego and insecurity. LeBron reached out and touched each of the young men's chests as he continued. Life is a long journey. Basketball is just one chapter of that journey. And when you leave this game, when that day comes, when you can no longer play, the only trophy that will matter is the trophy you carry here. He pointed to their hearts. The trophy of the character you built, of the people you elevated, of the legacy of kindness you left in the world. Many years passed. LeBron James was now over 60. His hair, which had turned gray decades ago, had turned completely white. His body, which had been a perfect athletic machine for so long, had begun to show the inevitable signs of aging. But there was something in his eyes that had never faded. There was clarity. There was peace. There was the deep satisfaction of someone who had lived a complete life. Not perfect, not without error, but complete, genuine, meaningful. He was at a retirement ceremony in his name. But it wasn't a typical retirement ceremony. There weren't just records being remembered. There were stories being told. Stories of lives he had touched. Stories of people who had been lifted from their own arrogance through his humility. Stories of communities that had been rebuilt through his investments, not just of money, but of time, presence, and genuine love. Marcus was there too. Marcus was now a renowned educator. He had written books on personal transformation. He had established programs that spread to dozens of countries. He had helped millions of people understand the truth he had learned from that initial humiliation and subsequent compassion. When it came time for LeBron's final speech, he asked Marcus to join him on stage. 25 years ago, LeBron began, his voice steady despite his advanced age. A young player challenged me. He told me I was old, that my time was up, that he was the future and I was the past. And honestly, he was right about some things and completely wrong about others. LeBron smiled, and Marcus smiled too, because they both knew the full truth of this story. He was right that my time to dominate through pure athletic talent was over. But he was completely wrong that this meant my time to be relevant was over. Because, you see, I still had a legacy to leave. I still had lessons to teach. I still had a lifetime of mistakes to transform into wisdom that could serve others. LeBron took Marcus's hand. This man beside me was my greatest teacher, because he showed me that there is always room for transformation. That age is not a barrier to evolution. That humility is the door through which true greatness enters. And most importantly, he showed me that the true meaning of a life is not measured in points scored or championships won. It is measured in how you made others feel. It is measured in the lives you touched. It is measured in the legacy of character you leave behind. LeBron took a deep breath. So, as I leave this stage today, I leave you with one final message. To the athletes just starting out, to the men and women reaching their own peaks of excellence, I implore you to do what I haven't done for far too long. I implore you to balance external success with internal excellence, to chase records but with more passion, to chase integrity, to want to win but with more urgency, to be good. Because in the end, when it's all over, when the crowds have dispersed and the awards have rusted, the only thing that will remain is who you truly were. And that is the truth that has shaped not just my career, but my entire life. When LeBron stepped off the stage, Tears were shed in the crowd, not because he had won championships, not because he had broken records, but because he had truly lived. He had been real, and that truth had touched something deep within every person present. Gloria James, still alive at 95, was sitting in the front row. When she saw her son come down, she slowly stood up and hugged him. "You finally understand," she whispered in his ear. "You finally understand that being alone at the top is a failure, but being surrounded by those you have elevated is a true victory." And in that embrace, in that sacred moment, LeBron James's entire journey was complete. Not because he had achieved everything he had ever wanted, but because he had finally understood that it had never been about conquest. It had always been about transformation. It had always been about discovering that the true crown is not made of gold or diamonds. The true crown is made of the character you cultivate, the love you share, the legacy of humanity you leave behind. And this truly is a crown that never rusts, that never fades, that reverberates through the centuries, inspiring generations yet unborn to be better, not because they need to be the best, but because they choose to be truly human. They choose to be good. They choose to live by the true meaning of greatness, elevating others while elevating themselves. This is the truth LeBron James learned, and this is the truth that through him the world has learned as well.